A sneeze from the wrong person could end your entire family. Plagues roll through like uninvited house guests and leave entire villages empty. The Black Death alone wipes out a third of Europe in just a few years. And that's just the most famous one. If it's not disease, it's hunger. One bad harvest, you're boiling weeds and praying your teeth can handle bark stew. Winter isn't a season, it's a siege, and you're losing. War makes things worse. Soldiers don't just fight battles. They loot, burn, and eat whatever they can grab, including your stored grain, your chickens, and possibly your last goat. Congratulations, now you're starving and homeless. Medical care? Hilarious. Your doctor's toolkit includes leeches, sharp knives, and a prayer to Saint Whoever. Surgery happens without anesthesia, in a room that smells like death, because it is. Even if you survive the treatment, the infection that follows will likely finish the job. And when the end finally comes, your funeral is short, cheap, and attended by people already dividing up your belongings. No stone marker, no romantic send-off, just a shallow grave and a prayer that the ground isn't frozen solid. In the Middle Ages, you didn't live life. You dodged death for as long as you can. And sooner or later, death wins. Always. In the Middle Ages, survival was a constant struggle. Childbirth was among the most perilous experiences a woman could face. There was no prenatal care, no sterile instruments, and no anesthesia. Midwives did their best, but even a minor complication could mean death for the mother, the child, or both. Some women survived a dozen pregnancies, but many died before their children were grown. Once the child was born, the mother's work only increased. She was expected to nurse, cook, clean, and work in the fields, often within days of delivery. Social. Roles were rigid and unforgiving. An unmarried woman was viewed with suspicion. A widow was vulnerable to exploitation. An outspoken woman risked accusations of witchcraft, particularly if she possessed herbal knowledge or an independent temperament. Religious life offered few freedoms. Even within convents, nuns lived under strict regulation, with their spiritual authority always subordinate to men. Violence was not an aberration, but a part of everyday life. The law provided little protection for the weak. Punishment was often public and brutal, hands severed for theft, tongues pierced for lying, and the infamous scold's bridle used to silence women deemed troublesome. Trials relied on ordeals rather than evidence, retrieving a stone from boiling water to prove innocence, or being thrown into a river, where sinking meant innocence, but also likely death. Public executions drew large crowds and were treated as spectacles. For men, warfare, feuds, and accidents were constant dangers. Even walking to the market could bring an encounter with thieves or an overzealous tax collector. Disease, famine, and contaminated food claimed lives without warning. The average life expectancy hovered between 30 and 40 years, skewed lower by high infant mortality. Nearly half of all children died before the age of 5. Yet amid this hardship, people still sang, told stories, and built communities. Laughter and love existed, though tempered by the constant presence of death. It was into a world still shaped by rigid hierarchy and limited opportunity that Sophie Friederike Augusta von Anhalt-Zerbst was born in 1729. The daughter of a minor, German prince, she was raised in the small principality of Pomerania. Her family's position afforded her a measure of privilege but little real power. From an early age, however, Sophie displayed keen intelligence, charm, and ambition, qualities that would one day transform her into Catherine the Great, Empress of Russia. Her mother, Johanna, was cold and calculating, not a nurturing figure but a relentless social climber obsessed with status. Her father, a disciplined Prussian officer, was distant and emotionally unavailable. In such a household, affection was scarce, but ambition was plentiful. From an early age, Sophie learned to walk the fine line between obedience and cunning. She read voraciously, mastered multiple languages, and developed a talent for observing a room before speaking, a skill that would later become a vital weapon in one of Europe's most treacherous courts. When Empress Elizabeth Petrovna of Russia began searching for a bride for her heir, Grand Duke Peter, she looked beyond Russia's borders. Peter, himself of German descent, was thought to be better matched with a foreign bride, someone pliable, grateful, and easy to control. Sophie fit the role perfectly. Noble blood, Lutheran faith, which she would be expected to abandon, and a reputation for grace and humility. At just 14 years old, Sophie was summoned to Russia. She arrived in the frozen capital of St. Petersburg in 1744, dressed in thin German fabrics and armed with a carefully measured diplomatic smile. Her mother pushed her forward like a chess piece, but Sophie was quietly setting her own board. To be accepted in Russian society, she converted to Orthodoxy, taking the name Ekaterina Alexeyevna, Catherine. The conversion was more than a ceremony. It was the burning of a bridge. She stepped into a foreign empire with no way back. No one watching that quiet teenager in a fur-trimmed coat could have predicted the empire-shaking future she would claim, one of betrayal, revolution, enlightenment, and absolute power. Her marriage to Grand Duke Peter was intended to secure her place in the dynasty, but it quickly felt more like a cage than a crown. Peter was no romantic prince, awkward, immature, and infatuated with toy soldiers. He preferred staging mock battles in his chambers to governing an empire or showing his wife affection. Some accounts suggest he refused to consummate the marriage. For years, he idolized Frederick the Great of Prussia and openly scorned the Russian court that had adopted him. Catherine, in stark contrast, embraced Russia with determination. She learned the language, immersed herself in its history, and absorbed Orthodox rituals until they became second nature. While Peter dreamed of returning to Prussia, Catherine envisioned herself as part of Russia's future. The court she had entered was a nest of vipers, gossip, paranoia, and ruthless ambition. Empress Elizabeth still ruled with absolute power, but her health was failing, and every faction was preparing for the inevitable transition. Catherine was under constant surveillance. Her letters were intercepted, her friendships questioned, her movements noted. She could not rely on her husband, her mother, still serving foreign interests, or even her own servants. But she adapted. She began cultivating allies quietly, military officers, scholars, and influential courtiers. She gained a reputation for dignity and self-control, a striking contrast to Peter's childish outbursts and contempt for Russian customs. Behind closed doors, she devoured the works of Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Montesquieu, forming a vision for a stronger, more educated, more rational Russia. The obstacle was clear. As long as Peter lived, she would remain a powerless consort, tethered to an unfit ruler. Catherine understood that the Russian throne was never truly inherited. It was taken. In 1762, after nearly 20 years of waiting, watching, and maneuvering, her opportunity arrived. Empress Elizabeth was dead, and Peter, now Peter III, wore the crown. His reign began to unravel almost immediately. In the months that followed his accession, Peter III dismantled the fragile goodwill of his court with astonishing speed. He alienated the Orthodox Church by reversing long-held policies, offended the nobility with thoughtless decrees, insulted the army by undermining its traditions, and lavished praise on Prussia, Russia's historic enemy. He humiliated the clergy, hinted at divorcing Catherine to marry his mistress, and governed with a recklessness that turned both allies and subjects against him. The Imperial Guard, long a pillar of Russian stability, grew restless. Its senior officers, many personally loyal to Catherine, grumbled in the corridors. Generals who had once served under Peter now spoke openly of their discontent. Among the people, Peter's disdain for Russian customs and his worship of Frederick the Great were seen as proof that he was a foreign puppet unworthy of the throne. Catherine watched all of this with patient calculation. In July 1762, while Peter was away at his summer palace of Oranienbaum, she struck. Supported by key military figures, including her confidant and lover Grigory Orlov and his influential brothers, Catherine rode into St. Petersburg in full imperial regalia. Before the assembled regiments of the Imperial Guard, she was proclaimed Empress Catherine II. The coup was swift and bloodless. Taken by surprise and abandoned by his own officers, Peter surrendered within days. He was placed under guard and shortly afterward was found dead under circumstances the court deemed natural. Officially, his death was attributed to illness. Unofficially, whispers of assassination spread quickly. Catherine now reigned, not by inheritance nor by the legitimacy of marriage, but by sheer will, intelligence, and political daring. It was an unprecedented rise. A foreign-born woman with no direct claim to the throne had seized the Russian Empire without a single battle. Yet Catherine understood that a crown taken by intrigue could just as easily be lost the same way. If she was to survive, she needed to transform her image from that of a conspirator into that of a ruler. And not merely a ruler, but a visionary.